Hello fellow humans. My name is Alex. I've got a slide about that, hold on. Help. Alright, so the font's all messed up and I'm confused because my slides don't look the same, but it's all fine. This may end up being a very literal title, but we'll see. I only finished the talk about 4:30, so if you haven't noticed, I'm from Birmingham, but I've lived in Leamington since the mid-90s, so anyway, we'll get to that. Who am I, what do I do, why am I here, and other existential problems. This is the slide where I introduce myself. My name's Alex, I make video games. My first job was at Codemasters in 1996. I've been making games ever since. I've been a designer and a programmer at basically all levels, from junior up to approximately technical director and stuff. I've done education, academic and educator I suppose are the same thing. I've been freelance, philanthropy is stretching it I suppose. I do a lot of I mentor people, I'm on the limit break thing, and I do a bunch of other stuff around to try and help people out where I can because I feel like it's a nice thing to do. I've been involved in founding several companies, and since 2014 I've been running my own micro studio, which sounds a lot grander than it is. It's basically me in my loft with a lot of dev kits and PC. So why is this talk? Well, Helen from Ukie asked me to do it, and I wasn't convinced that it was actually going to be of much use to anyone, but actually it seems like there might be a little bit of overlap with Steve and Harinder's, which is not entirely, well, it is entirely accidental, it's not deliberate, but I guess Steve and I did talk, but I mean, either way. So it may get a bit existential. The one thing I'm definitely going to want to preface this with, you see that aeroplane, right, I'm sure everybody knows what survivorship bias is, I'm not going to bore you with that. There's going to be some of that in my talk, right, because I'm a white, cis-het, middle-class man who was born in the 70s, so I've got privilege, I've got, and I've been lucky, I've been fortunate. So I just want to preface it with that because some of the stuff I'm going to say, it's not contentious, but I want people to understand that I know I'm lucky, right? Because I have been. So I am here by accident, we're all here by accident, but not just because of the pure random chance of my two parents meeting and the DNA that they had mixing in the way that it did and all that sort of stuff. But I had no idea I wanted to make video games. I mean, I knew that I liked playing video games. Pac-Man came out when I was a kid, and I first came across it in a motorway services, and my dad and his best friend were smoking cigarettes and playing Pac-Man, and they wouldn't let me play. I was only about this tall. And that sort of started a bit of an obsession with video games as a thing, because it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life, obviously. But when I was that age, I wanted to be an astronaut, which was right out because of my glasses. And then I was into these Professor Brainstorm books when I was in the first couple of years of school, and I just learned to read. And he was the archetypal Victorian, lunatic inventor type person. And I think that's kind of how I ended up in video games, I think, is because I wanted to be him. Well, maybe I just am naturally like that. I'm sort of a tinkerer, I can't help it. And I think video games are the closest modern equivalent to that, basically. And so I studied computer science at university largely because I didn't want to study medicine, which my family was trying to make me do. I had a big falling out with my parents. It's not really, that's very much a first world problem, right? But by the time I was in my third year, I had no idea what I wanted to do at all. And pure fluke, my tutor at university had a friend who worked at one of the big, back then in the 90s, big computer game companies called Gremlin, who were in Sheffield. And he said, hey, you could make video games. And I was like, oh my God. Because see, back then everything was written in assembly, right? And so I assumed I couldn't do that because I'd learned to program in C and C++ at uni. But as it turned out, up at the PlayStation, you had to make games in C. So once I'd realised that was an option, I just bloody-mindedly chased it down like a Jack Russell, basically, and kept going for interviews until somebody offered me a job. And back then, so I started in the industry a long time, even before Harinder. You could get a long way by just being bloody minded and applying for jobs back then, because there weren't that many graduate positions and nobody knew, right? So in '96, the internet was really 2.5, 3 years old, in its modern form. Most companies didn't even have websites. That's how long ago it is. Anyway, whatever. So I got a job at Codemasters, and it was awesome for a bit. And I had a really good time. And to Harinder's point, 10 years previous to Harinder's entry into the industry, it was basically being in in-betweeners with computers. And that's not even a word of a lie, it was. At Codemasters, there were maybe 6 or 7 women in the whole company. There was no people of colour. It was a weird, strange place, especially coming from Birmingham, which is a very multicultural city. I found it very odd. Anyway, that's true of Leamington to an extent as well, I suppose. But was a point here. Oh yeah, but and all of the ladies worked in traditionally lady roles like admin and accounts, so it was like even weirder because I'd never interacted with any of them unless I needed to get an expenses form stamped or something. But anyway, so that was all fine. Ooh, is there a scrolly thing? My notes are apparently way bigger than the window. So it was great, and I started off as a programmer, making prototypes of games, and by pure fluke I was sat in the same room as the person who was in charge of design for the company, because this is so bad there wasn't even really a design department, it was just some people sat in a room, right? So I became a designer, and then that seemed like the best job ever, but I found it very frustrating because I was just designing stuff other people told me to, and I hated it. But I didn't think I had a better option than to stay there because I was like young and whatever. But I mean, still, the games I worked on were cool, like Colin McRae Rally and Micromaniacs and Tucker Touring Cars and a bunch of other things that were all like really big games back in the day. But the company made 25 million quid from Colin McRae Rally, profit that is, not just like turnover. And they rolled us all into this room one day and they said, right, we made 25 million quid last year, we've got 60 people in development at the moment. What we're going to do is get 150 people, and then it'll just multiply it by the number of people. And so in 5 years, you'll all be rich, here's some shares, right? And then what happened was, a couple of years later, Codemasters axed a lot of jobs, like they build tons of buildings. There's like an amphitheatre. I mean, honestly, the whole thing was a bit bonkers, but I mean, yeah, I think they were children of the 80s and they just didn't know how to like pull themselves in from that. So anyway, Codemasters actually not jobs, and at the time I was kind of fed up, right? I was fed up of the culture and the people who were my bosses. Not my immediate boss was lovely. Dave still works around here somewhere quite a lot of the time, although he lives in Cornwall. Dave was my immediate boss, who lots of you know Dave Osborne, don't worry, it doesn't matter, I'll shut up now about that. So they were making redundancies, and I was just fed up to the back teeth of the place, so I took voluntary redundancy, which I mean at the time was a really like, oh my god, what do I do? I'm going to do it, it'll be fine. And my wife and I were about to get married, so it helped pay for my half of the wedding, which was great. But so then, by pure, I mean the thing is, I had no idea there were the video game companies around here, and in Leamington there were a bunch. There was Blitz and there was Smart Dog who I went to work for. I had a new job within 48 hours. Told them I was good at AI programming, never done any AI programming in a live game. And then I wrote the AI for this game, which the game sucked. Mostly the AI was awesome, obviously. But there were reasons why, but I mean, the problem is I've only got 15 minutes and the potted history of my career is like longer than that. So I'm going to just blitz through these things. Downforce was cool, but it went wrong for several reasons. So the company who owned Smart Dog was a French company called Titus, who, if you Google it, it's kind of infamous. What they did was they made 500 million quid, or dollars, or maybe euros, I don't know, on the French stock exchange as a bonded loan, right? Then they bought into play Virgin and a bunch of massive publishers and companies. Then we're like, cool, now we own half the industry, so the money's going to roll in. And then there were just these two French guys who'd made an Amiga game about a fox. They had no idea what they were doing, and the whole thing slowly imploded over a period of about 18 months. Like the last paycheck I had from Smart Dog before the company went bust was transferred literally from the bank of Virgin Spain into the company's bank account 3 days after we should have been paid. And then the guy was there paying everybody, so, you know, anyway, whatever. So that was all a bit mad, and I got made redundant, although obviously one of those was by choice. Twice within 18 months. But before I left Codemasters, I keep missing my notes because I'm blethering, but part of that was like, there was almost like an underground of people who wanted to do other stuff, right? And so Rich Ogden, who's over there, and I and a bunch of other people, we would meet up in a pub like the People's Front of Judea in Life of Brian, and like plot our revenge of how we were going to make a better company. And Rich actually did it, right? Rich actually went off and made a better company, but I took voluntary redundancy. So after, by pure fluke, some friends of mine who were at Freestyle, who were at Coders as well, most of them, had decided to make a company, and they'd managed to get funding through like reasons and ways, right? And with a couple of friends of ours who basically we knew, my friend Dave Osborne, who I mentioned, his wife was best friends from school with this guy who worked at Rare called Alex Zorro, who runs Pixel Toys, or one of the two people who runs Pixel Toys. I'm not entirely sure how Andrew would feel about me saying Alex runs it. I don't know. Anyway, so Alex and Dave and Phil Hindle, who like now is the technical director of SEMA in Leamington, and well, there were a few of us, right? And we formed this with the basis that like all these companies were mismanaged by idiots who had loads of money and grew up in the 80s, and they didn't know what they were doing, and we were going to do it properly. So that's what we did for a while, and that worked really well. Like we started off with the best of intentions. We made some sort of weird games just because that was what we managed to get Sony to agree to having us make. We made this B-boy game which sadly didn't do very well, even though it was really cool, and it had mocapture of basically the top 40 B-boys in the whole world in it, and we had them. They were all over here with like monogrammed ward like dressing gowns and breakdancing and stuff. Anyway, whatever. It was weird. So that didn't do well, but it was fine because once we produced the game, everybody believed that our company was capable of actually producing games on time. So then we sort of got some investment, and we, like, by pure fluke, we thought up the idea. Well, we knew Guitar Hero was a big thing, and we basically came up with the idea for DJ Hero, pitched it around. After a lot of shenanigans involving like Activision being acquired by another company, we ended up re-pitching it to Activision once it was already in development, and then Activision bought it and they bought the company, which was lovely. So I wasn't a major shareholder, but you know, it was obviously definitely not a bad thing to happen to somebody who was at the start. But that, again, that was, I guess the theme of this is that I've been winging it my whole life. Like I've got this, generally like I have I want to do this, or that seems like a good idea. And a lot of that was predicated on, the reason I got into video games was just because it seemed like the coolest idea possible, and there were a load of things I wanted to make. Like when I was a kid, I used to dream about games that I could make, and I used to do like bad board games or whatever. And so a lot of my decisions have been predicated on like this. To go back to, actually no, do you know what? I'm thinking about a talk from the Brighton event, which I wasn't at, but I watched earlier. So everybody should watch this talk, right, by this guy Dax from the Brighton event, and his name's Dax Ginn or Gin. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce it. It sounds like someone out of Star Wars, but he's a real person from Australia. And he did a brilliant talk about like the problem with passion in the industry, and my talk ties almost exactly into his, and a little bit into Steve's as well. So a lot of these decisions were predicated on like, oh, that gets me closer to this idealised happiness of making my own games and doing what I want, right? So I just sort of went along with all those things. And again, I was lucky, right? We started a startup. Freestyle went bust within the first 8 months that it was there, and I think it might have even gone bust twice. I'm not sure. But I would have been able to do that if I didn't have a wife who was a teacher and had a good salary, and who would just let me do my dumb Alex flights of fancy, right? So I've been lucky. Right, hold on. Okay. So that's good. So at Freestyle, I still wasn't making the games I wanted to be, but at least I was a shareholder, and I was involved in something with friends, and we were running the company and stuff. And I also got to work on a bunch of things that I find really interesting, like graphics engines and tool chains and stuff, right? So that was generally... Oh, actually, I've lost something there. There should be a picture in this gap. I don't know if, you can see it on the screen, but you can't see it. So once we sold the company to Freestyle, I was still kind of once we sold Freestyle to Activision, I was still kind of frustrated by not making my own games, or at least that's what I thought I was frustrated by. So, and my wife and I had just had a kid, so I left Freestyle as soon as I was physically allowed from the contract we'd signed with Activision. Like literally the next day I was out of the office. And I started a skateboard company, which in retrospect was a bad idea. Cost me about £5,000. I've still got some of the skateboards, which is fine. But anyway, I've been skateboarding since I was a kid. That's a whole other story. So I was sort of assumed I'd be able to start a website selling skateboards, and that would make me enough money that I'd be able to chip in for the house stuff, and then that way my wife wouldn't feel bad that she was paying for everything. And I wouldn't feel bad that my wife was paying for everything, right? So that was good. So I was a stay-at-home dad, and I was basically going to soft plays every day and just chilling with my 18-month-old kid, playing in ball pools, all that sort of stuff that everybody wishes they could do, and I was just lucky enough to be able to do it, which was awesome. But after a bit, the plan was to make indie games, because around this time was when Steam first kicked off for indies, right? So there were a couple of titles like Frozen Synapse, I think maybe was the one that springs to mind, which had come from sort of nowhere, gone on Steam, and they'd done very well out of it. So I was like, that's what I should be doing. But I was a little bit scared of just spending all my spare time doing that. So I got involved with this thing at Birmingham City University called Gamer Camp. And I actually got involved before any of it really kicked off, and I helped co-design the course. I used to teach the programming masters for the first 3 or 4 years it ran. Gamer Camp's actually, there's quite a lot of alumni for Gamer Camp in Leamington and all over the place. I'm not sure whether anybody's here, because it ran until last year. It's been running for, since I left still. But yeah, that's one of the things I'm most proud of, because I feel like I actually, although obviously people were paying to do a master's, so it wasn't philanthropy as such, but I was helping people. I felt like I was helping people bridge that gap between graduating with no idea, which, I mean, again, like, I'm going to make a lot of tangents for which I can't really apologise enough. Steve and I share similar brains. Hold on. Yeah, so one of the things that I really felt was when I got my job at Codemasters, and people were like, oh yeah, just do this thing. And I was like, I've literally no idea how to do that thing at all. And so I felt like I wanted to redress some of this by going in this Masters. We were basically helping people to bridge that gap between finishing a degree in computery game related subjects and actually getting a job at a real studio. So Gamer Camp was really cool. Like I said, sadly it's gone. It was like a workplace simulation, so it was like you paid for a Masters but you did an apprenticeship. Anyway, like I said, it's gone. Then Steve and I, while all this was happening, I met Steve. Actually, for the second time. The first time I met Steve was when he was teaching me Wing Chun before he got into the industry, which again is another story. But Steve and I were of a similar mind that we felt like the indie game space was an interesting thing to do, and so we started a co-working space down by the train station underneath some railway arches. Like, it's not literally just a railway arch with a load of bins in it or anything. It's like, it's a real building that the council fitted out with stuff so you could put electrics in it and whatever. I know, in fact, Stacey probably had something to do with the funding for that. Yeah, there we go. I'm pretty sure she did. So Arch Creators was again another thing. Like, we were really trying to make a difference and like make a culture. Like, culture's the wrong word. We're like a youth centre for indie game developers, right? Like, that's the pitch. And we provided like a place with cheap desk space, internet, like a nice coffee machine, friendly people to ask questions of. Like a place where big publishers or like platform holders could come and see a load of indies all in one go. So like we accomplished loads of cool things. Like, we had monthly meetings where like 100+ people would come who were all into indie development and whatever. Sony came up from London and did the first ever dev conference outside of London within the UK, and a bunch of things. But again, it didn't really pan out because like, we sort of overestimated how much money indie developers had to spend, but it did work out in some ways though. Like, Steve's and a couple of other companies got funded and they used the Arch as an office, and they ship games and stuff, so that's all good. But then I was still frustrated, right, because while Game Camp was great and it allowed me to work basically 2 days a week and get a reasonable salary, like, my kid went to school and I thought, this is it, I'm going to make video games, and basically somehow I failed to do that in the spare time that I had available. So I thought, no, I need to completely leave all my jobs and go indie again. And almost instantly when I did that, I basically bumped into someone, two of the other people from the Arch, Ollie and Halana, Modern Dream, who were making this game, LA Cops, and they were like, oh, we need someone to port the Xbox version of this from PC. And we don't know how to do it. Can you do that sort of thing? And I was like, well, yeah, I used to write game engines. So by pure fluke, I did that. And it was sort of putting off, I think, again, a common theme of like my winging everything is that I get scared of like the potential downsides. Like, I always need a safety net for it. So the safety net for me when I went indie was to just keep doing ports because someone else is paying and I don't have to worry about what happens when I spend 2 years making a game and it doesn't sell. So I did that, and then I did another one called Tokyo 42, and while I was doing that, I built some middleware for Unity that I'm still using now. For these are all games that I've done. Road to Grand Dom's the one that I'm probably the most proud of. I worked on that with Steve, and it's really, like, it didn't do well for lots of weird reasons, but like, it's a really cool little game about driving around China in the 90s in a broken car. And it's mostly a story, it's hardly at all about driving. So, you know, you can probably pick it. I don't even know if it's still on sale, but you can get it on the Switch. Anyway, so that's all weird. And sort of where I'm at now is that I basically port stuff and I'm notionally an indie game developer. So I work 3 days a week. At the moment, I'm working 3 days a week for a company called Bithell Games, who was founded by somebody who used to work probably in this office, I'm guessing, Mike Bithell. And I just shipped this Tron game not long ago. But so I work 3 days a week, and then I do my own thing for Darbotron 2 days a week. And I'm like, my plan, hopefully, still at the end of this, sometimes I'm going to get to make my own games because I'm trying to like make a revenue stream out of this middleware. It's going all right, right? So this all is very random, and I freely admit that. So, like, what's the message, right? What is the message? It's a good question. I say normally these sort of things tend to be pitches, like Steve's wasn't and Harina's wasn't actually, but typically when you come to one of these, everyone's like, hey, come to my company, it's really cool, you know, or we sell good middleware, or like buy our 3D software that's definitely a lot more expensive than Blender, or whatever, right? So I guess the long and short of it is, I've spent most of my life winging it, like right away from school. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I mean, nobody knows when they're a kid what they want to do, which is what's ridiculous that you have to make decisions about that when you're 16. But anyway, I've generally just pointed myself in the direction I think is the right way, and I've just like coped with the fallout from that. I mean, generally I'm also quite cautious by nature, although I do take these like crazy ideas and stuff. So I always have backups. But like one of the most important ones, and again this directly ties into something that Steve said, is one of the most important random things I did in my life was when I left Codemasters in 2001 when they were making redundancies, because up until that point I was worried about what would happen if I didn't have a job. And again, all of the qualifications about, you know, specific skills and privilege and all of those things, that to me was the massive weight off my shoulders. When if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. And that really sort of, yeah, got in my skin, and I was like, do you know what, I should just leave Codemasters. And you know, it's not because Codemasters were evil, right? Well, hold on, wait, so the point is serious. So one of the weird things about companies is they demand your loyalty, right? They want you to work, they want your passion and all of those sort of things. And again, this stuff ties into that, okay, that talk by Dax. But it's not really a two-way street, because it can't be, right? Companies can't be loyal to you. When they run out of money and they have to make redundancies, they can't suddenly magic money from nowhere to be loyal back to you, right? So what you need to remember as a human who works in any job, but in the game industry particularly, is your loyalty should not be to the company, because when it comes down to it, they're just a corporate entity to prevent the owners from getting sued if they mess things up, right? So, so again, not because things are evil or people are bad, but you just make your peace with that thing. And you may find that helps. I certainly have done, right, in my life. So again, one thing I'm really not saying is, I'm not saying leave your job and everything will be fine, right? I'm not on any level saying that. But what I am saying is, I think the reason this talk was called self-determinism and winging it is because I feel like what I've actually been chasing all these years, when it comes down to it, is not my own gains, but the self-determinism to make the choices about what I spend my time doing, right? And I think that's all anybody really wants, probably, when it comes down to it. And understanding that a job is a thing you choose to be in, to me was a big thing, right? So I'm probably massively over, and I apologise for that. I've got one last little bit. So, and there were a couple of concluding parts here. Oh yeah, I've already covered that. It's a problem with you make too many notes. So the reason I realised all this though is because I've ended up freelance. Like ironically, when you're freelance, because I do porting and that's the thing that everybody needs, I never have trouble finding work, which again is like a right place, right time sort of thing. So, but what that meant was that I could basically say to people, they say, come and work for us, Alex. And when someone says, come and work for us, it puts you in a very different position from a negotiating point of view. So I can say, cool, but I'm only doing 3 days a week and I do the hours when I want. And I want to just take holiday whenever I feel like it. And they go, okay, right? Because that's part of the deal. So you don't get that in an everyday job. But I think you should. That's so this is the thing, right? So the theme of these, if I'm remembering correctly, is developers unite. And so I'm not going to say unionise, although I am a Marxist at heart, so unionise brothers and sisters. But my question is really like, and again it's an open question, I don't know the answer to this. How do we move towards a position where where jobs are the thing that you do that makes you money, but your life is your life, right? Like how do we, because I'm really happy, like I feel bad for it, but like, because I know a lot of people aren't and the world's crap at the moment, but generally I'm really happy, you know, because I can work more or less when I want. I mean, I know it's not quite that simple, but because I have that determinism, I still have to do things other people ask of me, but I've got that determinism. Even when I don't have the choice about when to do things, it means that I know I have most of the time, right? So it makes me happy. So how do we get there? How do we give everybody that? I don't honestly know the answer to this. I think partly employers just have to accept that they don't own their employees and they need to take that position right from the beginning. They need to let people do part-time. It might be a bit more admin overhead, right, for the people who are running the company, but I think it would be worth it because everybody will be happier. So now I'm happy, right? I work like 24 hours a week, and I'm not bragging, I promise. But I reckon I probably do at least a day's extra work in that time purely because I'm always chilled, I'm always happy. You know, I'm not burnt out or tired because I work under my own rules. The other thing is I don't ever work for people who allow crunch in their studios anymore either, which actually is becoming more common, so that's good. Right, so anyway, that's kind of my, I guess it's not really a manifesto. Like, how do we all be happy? And I think the answer is companies need to be cooler to their employees. Okay, and watch Dax's talk because his company is already doing this, and it might be a model. I didn't know until like about 3 o'clock this afternoon. Maybe rewrite the whole last slide. So anyway, thank you for listening. Hope it wasn't too random and tangential. We do have, I don't know, we probably don't have time for questions, but there is a slide that says it. So I'm going to stop and let Sam take it.
Start with a round of applause.